boys.
Just enough.
Yeah.
Okay, Dave T. Interview, take 1.
This is Sophie Hurst reporting for the Winter Mixtures Youth Club. This afternoon I am interviewing David T. First of all, could you tell me what about your life before you came to Hanborough?
Yes, I was born and bred in London, brought up in North London. I schooled there. At the age of 15, or just coming up 16, I started an apprenticeship in London where I trained as a dental ceramist. And I stayed there until I was about 22, and then previously to that I met my wife and we were married, and I moved to Long Hamburg in about 1968, having qualified as a dental ceramist and worked in Harley Street in London.
When you came to Hamburg, you joined the police force. Why?
Well, when I first came to Hanborough, I lived here part of the week and I was living in London the remainder of the week, travelling backwards and forwards. And in the end, the travelling became just too much. We didn't have the motorway then, and fog conditions in the winter made me think I ought to look for something else. And I was able to obtain a job in Oxford with a colleague of mine in the dental world who I trained with in London, and I worked with him for about 18 months before I took up a post in the police service. The reason for that was that his business at that time got into financial trouble and I had to look for other employment, and rather than moving back to London or moving to somewhere like Bristol or Birmingham where the dental work was, I decided I'd look for something else to do. And as I'd already been very interested in the police force when I was a youngster in London and had friends who were policemen, I thought perhaps the police service would be the answer to my problems at that time.
What do you think about a modern police force? Is it a more difficult job than it used to be? Are people more violent today, and if so, why?
In a sense, the police service has moved very quickly over the last few years in its modernisation of equipment and ways in which we are backed up by other services. I don't think it's more difficult, not for the experienced policeman. Perhaps it's a little bit difficult for the young policeman coming in, partly because when I joined the police service I spent my first 2 years walking the streets of Woodstock, meeting people, talking to them, getting to know the people in the town, and learning the, as we call it now, beatcraft of actually being able to communicate with people. And the police service over a period of years tended to lose that when they went into the panda car and everybody sort of started chasing around in panda cars going from place to place, and the beat officer and the village bobby seemed to disappear. But the police service now are trying to overcome that problem and are putting more men back on the street so that they learn this street craft and they learn to speak to and work with other people other than those in the police service. So in a sense it's probably more difficult for a younger policeman coming into the police service than it was when I first started, because I knew nothing else than walking the streets. As far as has society got more violent, if you look back in history, when the police service first started, it was a very, very violent situation then. Riots in the streets of London and all the other major cities. So I don't think that we've become more violent, but I think the problem of the media, television, radio, newspapers and magazines, make it more and more available for other members of the public to see. And therefore the very, very small minority tend to pick up on this violence and think it's the good thing to do. And therefore, when we have violent situations in other parts of the country, even in Oxford, we find we have little violent sessions breaking out, probably because it's a copycat situation with the violence in other parts of the country.
I believe you're involved with St John's Ambulance. Could you tell me more about your work with this organisation?
Yes, when I first came to the village here, I realised that there was a need for something to involve certainly boys between the ages of 11 and 16. There was no scout group in the village, and I started off with the support of the local division, a cadet division for boys, which quickly spread to a girls' division as well. So I had a joint division of girls and boys, and I ran the division in the village for something like 6-7 years. And then unfortunately perhaps I was asked to take over a much greater role within the county of Oxfordshire and to look after all the divisions in central Oxford. That included Oxford City itself and right the way out as far as Carterton and Burford, places like that. Had to look after all the divisions that had cadets in them, so I had 9 divisions under me at that time. And since then I've been promoted or moved sideways so that I now look after all of the divisions in West Oxfordshire, adults and young people. And my job there is to be an advisor to them, and also to make sure that they work within the brigade regulations and try and help them with any problems they have. So I've gone away from the actual initial reason for starting off the brigade in Hanborough, or the division in Hamburg for cadets, but I've moved to a much wider scope now, dealing with adults as well as children.
What do you think about the young people of today? Are they better or worse than years ago?
I don't think young people are any worse than they were years ago. They still have a sense of fun, although perhaps their discipline is not quite the same as it would have been when I was a youngster. I'm afraid parental discipline is not as strong as it could be, but I'm not saying that it ought to be as strong as perhaps it was when I was younger. I think in general, again, it's perhaps the media which stresses and picks out the very small percentage of young people that creates the impression that young people are an unruly mob. This isn't so. There are groups of young people in this village who work very hard when it comes to raising funds for people overseas or for raising funds for people in this country. They're not unruly. They're not the yobs by any means. We have 1 or 2 young people in the village who perhaps are lost for direction, and because of that reason then they tend to be put into the class of young people who have layabouts and have got nothing to do. Perhaps we as people living in the village, or police officers or whatever, should try and encourage them to get involved in something, so that they, like young members of the youth clubs in the village, have got an interest and can put their energies into something useful rather than just sitting around. So I really don't think that they're any different to the young people of my time.
What do you think about today's church? Is it what it should be?
I think that today's church has got to be far more outspoken on the political field. They've got to be able to say what they feel about world situations, what they feel about situations within the nation. I think we cannot sit back and let the world go by. I think we've been given a directive by Christ to go out, to look after one's neighbour, and when I say neighbour, I really do mean those that live in other parts of the world as well, although that's not the way the dictionary would define neighbour. I think that we've got to be far more outspoken, that there is something within the church for people young and old, and that if we could get the nation back to a far more God-loving nation that is at the present time, then perhaps many of our problems would be solved. But it's a very difficult situation. People say the church is in decline. I don't think that is true. I think the church in Great Britain, in fact, is on an upswing. But there's a lot more work to be done with young people in particular. And I think the church has a role to play socially as well as in its Christian field of work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy,
Like that.
Sophie, a nice
Speak
smile to
then.
start it. So once the clipboard's on and Bob says go, just smile. And then slow into it. This is Sophie Hurst.
Do you hold it up like that and then speak?
Yeah, take it. Love it.
Dave T. Interview Take 2.
This is Sophie Hurst reporting for the Winter Mixtures Youth Club. This afternoon I'm interviewing with David T. First of all, could you tell me about your life before you came to Hanborough?
Yes, I was born and bred in London, North London. I did all my schooling there, and at the age of 15, coming up 16, I took on an apprenticeship in the dental world and qualified as a dental ceramist. I worked in central London around the Harley Street area for about 3 years, and then having married I moved out to Hanborough, and still travelled backwards and forwards in fact to London for the first year while I was living here.
When you came to Hamburg, you joined the police force. Why?
As I say, when I first came to Hamburg, I travelled backwards and forwards to London, and in that period of time I obtained another job with a colleague that I'd worked with in London, and he set up a business in Oxford, and after 18 months, unfortunately, the business got into financial trouble, and so I had to look around for another job. As a matter of fact, I got a job in Birmingham as an artificial eye fitter as well, because I had taken a course for fitting artificial limbs as an addition to my dental work. And I then decided that perhaps that wasn't the job for me, and I went and applied for a job in the police service because I'd been interested in being a policeman ever since I'd been at school. And I was accepted in the Thames Valley Police then, because it had been formed as the Thames Valley Police in 1968.
What do you think about the modern police force? Is it a more difficult job than it used to be? Are people more violent today, and if so, why?
I think the police service as a job is probably a little bit more difficult today than it was, certainly when I joined the police service. The young policeman today has a lot of pressures on him, and it's very difficult for them to learn, as I did when I first joined, sort of street craft. My first 2 years I spent on the beat walking Woodstock area, getting to know the people there, getting to know who was about at what time of day and what time of night, people I would expect to see at certain times of day and night, so that if there was anybody around that shouldn't be there, then they would stick out like a sore thumb. That sort of training is not quite so regular today because of the amount of work required from a police officer and the amount of pressures on him, so he spends much of his time driving around in a panda car going from call to call. So in a sense, yes, it is a little more difficult for the officer today, and the pressures, including new laws that are coming in at the present time, will put even more pressure probably on the younger policeman who has less experience. As far as violence is concerned, if you look back in history, then you would see when the police service first started, it was a very, very violent time in history. There were riots all over the country in all the major cities, but there wasn't the press coverage that we get now. So with television and radio and newspapers and magazines that we get today, for taking scenes while riots are happening rather than just reporting them in black and white, I think it tends to encourage that very small percentage, and when I say a small percentage I mean it, of people who are non-law abiding, looking for an opportunity to make the best of a situation, breaking into shops when something else is going on, when the police are tied up doing something else. So when people see this sort of thing on television and they see what a riot will do and how it gives them an opportunity, I think we get copycat situations then popping up all around the country. But to be quite honest, I don't think that the situation is any more violent now than it really was many years ago.
I believe you're involved with St John's Ambulance. Could you tell me more about your work with this organisation?
Yes, when I first moved to the village, I found that there was a need for lads between the ages of 11 and about 16 to have an interest. There was no scout group in the village, that was Evesham, so it meant that anybody wanting to continue from Cubs to Scouts would have to travel to Evesham in the evening and back. And this obviously cut out a certain amount of young people having an opportunity to do something. So with the help of the people in the village who had already St John Division here, I formed a division for ambulance cadets, boy cadets. And very shortly after I'd started that, I found that there was also a large demand for girls who wanted to learn first aid and nursing. And so the division became a combined division of boys and girls. and I ran that division for about 6.5 years. After that, the county obviously decided I'd probably done a good job here, and I was interested in young people, and they asked me if I would take over a post for the whole of the central section of Oxfordshire, looking after 9 divisions which had cadet divisions within them, and my specific responsibility was to look after the cadet divisions and to make sure they ran properly, that they had programmes, and I organised things within the central area of Oxford for all the other divisions to come to and join in, competitions and fun days and sports days and things like this. And since that time I've been moved on yet again, and now I look after all of the divisions in the whole of Western Oxfordshire, and that includes the adult divisions as well as the cadet divisions, so it's quite a responsibility.
What do you think about the young people of today? Are they better or worse than years ago?
Again, I think we come back perhaps to press coverage. I think that there is nothing different about the young people of today. So those young people in my days and even before my time, I think that those that misbehave themselves get very much covered in the press, and it saddens me at times when young people like the people in this village get together, do 24-hour marathons to raise money for Ethiopia, run restaurants to obtain money for Ethiopia, and do all sorts of other good works within the village to help other people, and yet they get no press coverage at all, or very little press coverage, not the sort of national press coverage that those creating problems at football matches might. In general, I don't think that there is any greater problem with young people today than there was any other time in the history of this country, perhaps.
What do you think about today's church? Is it what it should be?
I think the church has got to be far more political and far more outspoken, or certainly outspoken on political matters rather than being political. I think we've got to stand up as members of the church, whether it be Baptist, Methodist, Church of England, Roman Catholic or whatever, and to say to our government, when it comes to things of world importance, that people living abroad are our neighbours, not just the people that are living next door to us. We've got to have a concern for other people in other parts of the world, where they are unable, for reasons which we may not understand as general members of the public, that they can't cope. I think that we must be able to put pressure on our government so that we, as a nation, rather than as individuals, can help them in their problems. The Christian Church certainly has a message for everybody today, for young and old alike. And although people say that the church is declining, I think this is very untrue. I think we're on an upswing. It may be a difficult situation to get young people into the church and to bring other people back to the church. But I think this upswing is showing that there is a need for the church within the country, and that people are beginning to find that some of the answers they want, not only nationally but worldwide, can be answered by the church and by having a faith in God. So that I think the church today is doing its job. There is plenty more for it to do. We've got a long way to go before we're absolutely on top of everything. But I certainly think that we have a place within society as the church, and it's there for others to come to if they wish, and those of us in the church would obviously love to welcome them in to join us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hunt, if you'll take one.
This is Rowan George reporting for the Winter Mixtures Youth Club. This afternoon I am interviewing Mr. Hunt the butcher. First of all, could you tell me if you've always been a butcher? If not, what other jobs have you done?
No, I've always been a butcher. I was born into the butchering business. My 2 brothers are butchers, my father was a butcher, and my grandfather was a butcher.
So how long do you need to train to be a butcher?
Oh, I should say at least 2 years. 3 years preferable.
Have you seen many changes in your job over the years, and what are they?
There's quite a lot of changes over the past few years. particularly in convenience foods. Instead of selling meat bone in now, we're selling much more boneless and smaller cuts and easier to cut up for the housewife.
Are people buying more meat today than they used to, or less?
Nationally, about 10% less. But that's only a modern trend, I think. It will probably come back to more because everybody knows that there's more protein in meat than any other source.
What do you do with your leisure time?
I haven't got much. I should think taking my daughter to play tennis is what I spend most of my leisure time on. She's very keen.
Have you ever wanted to live in another country? If so, which one?
At one time I was very keen to go to New Zealand because I was friends with the New Zealand squadron when I was in the RAF, but not to live, no, just for a visit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hunt.
Is that?
Good afternoon.
Please.
£51, please. Thank you.
Working for the Winter Mixtures Youth Club. This afternoon I am interviewing Mr. Hunt the butcher. First of all, could you tell me if you've always been a butcher? If not, what other jobs have you done?
No, I've always been a butcher. My two brothers are butchers, my father was a butcher and my grandfather was a butcher, so I don't know any other job.
How long do you need to train to be a good butcher?
At least 2 years, preferably 3, because there's an awful lot to learn.
Have you seen many changes in your job over the years, and what are they?
Yes, there's a lot of change, and especially in fresh meat, because more convenience foods now than what they used to be. We sell a lot more meat now, which is boneless, and we have to cut it up smaller joints for the smaller housewives' needs. And also there's burgers and all that type of thing we make now we haven't used to.
Are people buying more meat today than they used to be, or less?
Nationally, 10% less. And that's probably a modern trend as regards fat in food, and that will probably pass and we shall sell more again.
What do you do with your leisure time?
I don't have a lot because with 3 shops to look after and all the booking and that to do, I don't have a lot, but I do follow my daughter. She plays tennis a lot and I take her out different tournaments when time permits.
Have you ever wanted to live in another country? If so, which one?
I was very keen to go and visit New Zealand at one time because I spent my time in the RAF with the New Zealand squadron, and I was very interested in their country, but it would only be for a visit. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hunt.
This is Jane Fathers reporting for the Winter Mixtures Youth Club. This afternoon I am interviewing Mr. Margetts, a farmer from Hanborough. First of all, could you tell me how long you have been farming and has it always been on this farm?
About 35 years, yes, and it has always been on this farm.
How has farming changed over the years, and could you tell me if things are easier now with all the modern machinery?
Well, it's changed tremendously since I started farming, because when I started with Father, we used to have a horse, and used to pull the harvest wagon and the hay wagon, and I can remember the tractor driver saying, "That horse has only got 2 speeds, dead slow and stop," and that was the pace of life in Hanborough then, and I'm not that ancient, we're only talking about 35, 40 years ago. We never dreamt of working on a Sunday, for instance, when Father was in charge, and there was none of this rushing around to get all the work done in the autumn. We used to spend all the winter ploughing and getting ready for the spring work. And we had a couple of very old tractors, and they had iron wheels. They didn't worry about punctures. And they didn't have a self-starter. You had to crank them in the morning. No cab. You had to have about 3 overcoats on when you weren't ploughing. So when it got to lunchtime, you were pretty tired and pretty hungry. But although, you know, we've got all this machinery, we spend a lot of time repairing machinery and looking after it and rushing about keeping it in order. So I don't know that I think in fact we work harder than we used to those days.
Thank you. What job do you most like doing on your farm?
I think I like working with the sheep because it's a traditional job and one can relax. The only thing is my dog, he was here a minute ago. I have to scream at him to get him to do anything, and that spoils it a bit, but otherwise that's what I enjoy best.
If you're not a farmer, what job do you think you'd like to be doing?
Well, it'd have to be something out in the fresh air, and I don't know, I was thinking about that. There's not many jobs available to me today. I suppose it would have to be a lollipop man or a traffic warden or something like that, but it'd have to be something in the fresh air.
What country would you most like to visit and why?
Well, that's an easy one because I've got friends and relations in South Africa and I haven't been there for 15 years, so I'd like to go out and see them, see all of those people.
If you had one wish, what would it be and why?
Well, I think I'd like to have somebody pay for a tour around the world, say for 2 years, all expenses paid, and going seeing all the farming in all the different countries, especially, say, Japan and China, somewhere like that.
What do you think of Hanborough as a village, and what changes would you like to see?
Well, I like Hanborough, and obviously I've lived here all my life, and I'm right on the fringe, on the border with Blaydon, but I know it's a very big village, and people say, well, you know, it's too big to be a nice friendly village, but I think we all get on very well together, and there's quite a lot going on in Hanborough. And I know what changes I don't want to see it get any bigger. That's what worries me. But as I asked my wife, and she said she'd like to have somewhere in the centre of the village where you could go and have a cup of coffee and see your friends, and a better shopping centre with better parking and a better bus service.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Margits.
Okay.
Simpson reporting for the Winter Mitchell's Youth Club. This afternoon I am interviewing Mr. Oliver, a garage proprietor from Long Hanborough. Mr. Oliver, first of all, could you tell me about the garage over the years? I believe your dad built his first bus.
Yes, that's right, he did. He started his garage in about 1919 at the Three Horseshoes pub in Long Hanborough, just up the road. And then in about 1921 he moved down to where the present garage is. He built his first bus in 1926, And then he had the buses until 1956, 57. And he sold them all then, and we just do repairs now.
What is the most difficult repair job you have ever done, and how do you decide if a car is worth repairing?
Well, the most difficult one, I should think, was a fire engine we did once with all the wiring burnt out. Very difficult that was. Well, the write-off is decided, you take the cost of the repairs, the value of the car, and if the cost of the repairs are higher than the value of the car, therefore you write the car off.
What are your hobbies?
My hobbies are rebuilding old cars, vintage cars, and oil painting.
Have you ever had any embarrassing moments involving your job?
Yes, once. I resprayed a car the wrong colour for a customer, but luckily he was quite happy with the colour I did paint it.
What job do you most dislike doing in the garage?
I think the paperwork.
If you had one wish, what would it be and why?
What would my wish be? I should think my wish would be to fly an aeroplane.
And why is that?
Why? Well, I've always wanted to look for the blue in my life, and I think that you can find it in an aeroplane.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right, oh dear, thank you.
Mr. Hawkins, take one.
This is Katie Hopkins reporting for the Winter Mixtures Youth Club. This afternoon I am interviewing Mr. Hawkins, the headmaster from Hamburg School. First of all, Mr. Hawkins, could you tell me about your life before you started teaching?
Well, I was born in London, in Clapham, lived there till I was 11. My dad was a taxi driver, and then we moved out to outer London, to Sutton, and I lived there until I was 18 and went to college in Portsmouth and did a degree in psychology and zoology. Then I went to London again and drove a truck for 18 months. Then I went to Wales and got married, and then I went to Liverpool and trained to be a teacher for a year. Then I moved down to Oxfordshire and got my first teaching job. And after about 10 years, I came to Hanborough as deputy head, having got divorced and remarried in the meantime.
Okay. What made you decide to start teaching?
Well, funnily enough, it was because at the time I was living in Wales and I fancied going to New Zealand, and I looked down a list of jobs that they wanted for people emigrating to New Zealand, and the only one I liked was teaching.
Yeah.
So that was the reason. Although when I was younger I often thought about teaching, so I think I forgot it and then remembered it later in life.
When you took over as headmaster at school, what job did you find most difficult?
I think the most difficult job is getting into the classrooms to be with the children and to teach, because you promise that you'll be in a certain classroom in the afternoon and help out the teacher and work with the children, and then the phone goes or a visitor comes and you find you can't keep your promise. I think that's the hardest thing.
Yeah. What do you like best about teaching?
The best bit of teaching to me is when the children have learnt to become independent with their work and they start coming up with their own ideas and saying, not just doing what you ask them to do, but saying, oh, can I do such and such? And then you really know they're enthusiastic about what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Do you think that there is enough discipline in schools today, or would you like to see more?
Well, I think the important thing about discipline is the kind of discipline, and what we try to encourage is self-discipline amongst the pupils, and that they should be able to organise their own behaviour in the way they contribute to the school, and that's what one's aiming for all the time. Of course, some children can't manage to control themselves or behave in a sensible way, and that's where teachers have to come in and enforce the school rules. But I think it's the type of discipline is as important as how much you have of it.
What do you think about the unemployment situation?
I think it's very tragic for children going through the schools now who may never get a job. I don't really think we'll ever get full employment back into the country. I think perhaps the only hope is to have a shift in the working pattern. For example, you could have a 4-day week instead of a 5-day week, so that the amount of work was shared out amongst everybody, so everybody did a sort of part-time job in a way, rather than just some working all the time and some never getting that opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Katie.
Reporting for the Winter Mixtures Youth Club. Today I'm with Mr. Foote, who is the landlord of the Three Horseshoes Public House. First of all, could you tell me how long you've been a landlord of this pub?
10 years. 10 years. It's a long time.
Could you tell me a little more about your life before you became a landlord?
Well, I was mainly involved with farming. I spent my last 12 years living at Henley, where I was estate manager for a chap by the name of Brigadier Crossland. We had mixed farm, mainly dairy, where we had the highest yielding jerseys in the British Isles, also world record Jersey heifers for the whole of the Jersey Society in New Zealand, Australia, South Africa and America. I've always enjoyed farming. I've always enjoyed the outside life. But the Brigadier died, and I found it extremely difficult to get a job which was like I'd been used to. So I decided I'd try something on my own. So I went from pulling pints of milk to pulling pints of beer.
So what actually made you decide to become a landlord of this pub?
Well, I suppose financial. I needed a way of making a living, and the brewery, I knew several people in the brewery because I used to train gun dogs, and they assured me that I would make a good landlord. They were wrong, of course, but I mean, they assured me, and I was foolish enough to believe them.
What do you do with your leisure time, and what are your hobbies?
Well, I love cricket. I love all sorts of field sports, and unfortunately with the pub you don't get a lot of leisure time. So, as I say, it's mainly the cricket, which I'm very, very keen on.
What do you think of Hamburg as a village?
Well, I think Hamburg is quite smashing. The problem, as far as I'm concerned with Hamburg, from one end to the other is too long. It needs squeezing up together a bit, because lots of people at one end of the village, I don't know, I've never even spoken to them. And you talk to people who come in here that used to say 20 years ago they knew everybody in Hamburg. Now they would only know a very small percentage, which is a shame.
What do you think things will be improved for young people in the village?
Well, obviously the nicest thing that could happen would be a youth centre. I was actively involved with youth club work many years ago, and we had our school closed in the village. We were fortunate enough to be able to take this over, and we used it as a youth centre. Most youth clubs are at a disadvantage because they have to put things up, take it down, all this sort of, they spend half the time taking it out, putting it away. Yeah, and Whereas with a youth centre, you can have all sorts of projects going and you can leave it up all the time.
If you had one wish, what would it be and why?
Well, if I had a wish, I would say I would like to have played county cricket for a living. Just goes to show how much I like cricket. You don't make much money playing county cricket, but it's a very enjoyable way of living. My grandfather used to always say, it sounds like Walter Gabriel this, that if you can get paid for doing something you do for nothing, that's the art of living. Bear that in mind. You spend most of your time, frog in the throat, you spend most of your time at work, and if you're doing a job that you don't enjoy, spoils your life really, doesn't it? Anyway, thank you for your questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Foot.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
This is Selena Smith reporting for the Winter Mixtures, and I'm going to be asking Mr. Hume some questions about gardening. What do you think about all the pesticides and fertilisers which are used in the gardens of today? Are they good for us or are they necessary?
Pesticides, not too good. Fertilisers, yes, providing they're of organic nature, such as bone meal, fish meal, hoof and horn, but inorganic, no.
What do you think about rotator? Are they as good as digging?
A rotavator is not as good as digging. I prefer to dig any time rather than use a rotavator. A rotavator is very apt to put a lot of the weeds back into the ground, and if you get squitch or anything like that, the next time you come you'll find you've got 10 times more than you had to start with.
What is the best way to get a good healthy lawn, green from moss, etc.?
Now that is a difficult one, and how I would go about that was, I think that you must get your lawn thoroughly aerated, thoroughly fertilised, and keep raking. There's a lot of dead stuff gets into it. And another thing for a good lawn is not to have it mown too short, and mow it often enough, twice a week in the summertime.
Does it pay to buy good seeds from well-known manufacturers such as Sutton, or are they all the same?
They're not all the same, but don't get confused with the idea that because we live in this part of the country and Sutton's was at Reading, that they are the only good firm, because there is many good firms. Now take for instance bees seeds. You get them out of Woolworths. They were always very cheap. Now bees seeds in Lancashire was the same as what Sutton's was down here. And one of the bee family left a block of shares to be turned into making seeds for non-profit making, and that's why you can go into Woolworths and buy a packet of seed at nearly half the price, but they're still quite good.
What do you most enjoy in your gardening?
I think digging.
What job do you least enjoy doing on the garden?
Moulding up potatoes.
What are good border flowers to plant which last a long time and give a good colour?
Oh, if you've got someplace, and not only good colour, but very cheap to do, if you've got somewhere where you can keep your geraniums frost-free during the winter, you can always get plenty cottons from them. They give a display of colour right from the first bloom right until the first frost. Also there's antirrhinums, gladiolas, not gladiolas, antirrhinums and dahlias. They're all good flowers, good showy flowers. Also stocks and one or two other ones that'll bloom quite a long time and give a marvellous display colour.
What is the hardest?
French marigolds is also another one that, and the African marigold is a good one.
What is the hardest vegetable to grow and why?
No. I don't think there's any hard vegetable to grow. There are people that can't grow some and other people that can't grow them. I'll give you an instance of this. I had about 300 geranium cottons a little while ago, and I'm one of these persons that have great difficulty in getting the marrow family, that's cucumbers and marrows and melons, to germinate. And this man came into the greenhouse and asked me, could he have some geraniums? I said yes. I said he can have some. And he was looking where the seed that I had sown with the cucumbers, which I wanted, and I had one very little spindly little plant. And I said, have you got any cucumbers? He said, I've got too many. Well, I said, I'll do the deal with you. I said, you can have some geraniums, and if you let me have a couple of free cucumber, and that's what we've done. But you see, I never have luck with that. These things. He can grow them just like that.
Does vegetable gardening really pay? When you can buy potatoes, etc., can you buy potatoes, etc., very cheaply?
Well, I think if you're going to look at it purely from a money point of view, probably it is just as cheap to go and buy potatoes and carrots, etc. But I like a potato to taste nice, and I like a carrot to taste nice, and you cannot beat going out into the garden, cutting a cabbage, coming in and cooking it. There's no comparison with the ones that you get out the shop.
What advice would you give to someone just starting out in a small garden?
Just starting out in a small garden. The first thing I would get them to do is to get that garden soil in good growing condition, plenty humus, etc., etc. And to really dig it deeply to start with. And grow vegetables and keep on feeding that ground until it was really in a good condition. And then if it's a small garden, you can intercrop. But you must always get your foundation right, the soil right. And that is the main thing with any garden, is getting your groundwork in.
Thank you.
This is Sonia Sherrill for Winter Mixtures Youth Club, and today I'm interviewing Reverend John Blythe.
Hello, Sonia.
Hello. Firstly, could you tell me about your life before you decided to become a minister of the church?
I think there were probably 3 stages. Because I left school when I was about 16, and I worked for a printing firm, and then I did my national service in the RAF, and then I trained as a teacher. And after all that, I decided to go into ministry.
What decided you to become a minister of the church?
I think I felt that Jesus Christ was the most important understanding that there is, the knowledge of Jesus, and I wanted to share this with other people.
Could you tell me why so many people in this world feel that they can live their lives without God?
Well, there's some evidence, Sonia, that a lot of people say they believe in God, that more people say they believe in God than don't in England, but it seems that a lot of people don't really grasp the personal nature of God as we understand him in Jesus. So we're back to Christian mission again and Christian teaching.
Can you say an end to the fact that a large number of the world's population is starving, and how do you think it could be solved?
This is obviously a very, very big issue, and it's certainly one which we as Christians have got to be very concerned about. Jesus didn't draw a sharp line between body and soul. He cared for the whole person, the whole man, and healed the spirit first, but certainly was very concerned about the body. You remember when he healed Jairus' daughter, first thing he said after was, "Give us something to eat." So Christians have always had a very important concern for the underprivileged, and certainly the gospel makes it quite clear that we must have that concern. How we can solve the problem, I think, is simply basically getting more and more people to realise that it's very wrong that 2/3 of the world are hungry and a third have much more than they need. We've got to learn to share, and maybe as we understand the way that Christ lived and the way he taught, that we'll learn to do it. But I think it's going to be a question of education, basically.
We see a lot of suffering in this world through illness, disease and starvation. How, as Christians, can we explain these problems?
There's no easy answer again to the problems of suffering. The Bible doesn't duck it. Jesus himself suffered, as we know, and he met suffering. Suffering can separate from God, but it can also lead people to God. And I don't think we should be too bothered about how suffering has come, or even why. What matters is that we can face it and have faith that God will bring good out of it. And that's the Christian message, that God can bring good out of suffering and evil.
If you could meet any one person in this world, who would it be and why?
I thought about this one because you did very kindly tell me you were going to ask me that question. I think if it was somebody alive today, I think probably Pope John Paul, because I think he's known suffering. He came from Poland, you remember, where there's been a great deal of persecution of Christians. I think he's got a broad vision of the meaning of Christ for the world, and I think he's a great leader in the church today. If you're going to the past, then I think I'd probably say St. Peter, because as you know, in Hanborough our church is dedicated to St. Peter, and he was one of the great apostles in the very beginning of Christianity. And I think I'd like to meet him again. Perhaps I will soon, because you know, we believe that we shall meet Christians who lived before, after this life. And it's All Saints' Day on Saturday, November the 1st, so maybe we'll be thinking of St. Peter then and others. But I think if it was today, I'd say Pope John Paul. From the past, I think I'd say St. Peter.
Thank you.
Okay.
This is Tracy Steffens reporting for Winter Mixtures Youth Club. This afternoon I am talking to Mr. Greenway about his life. First of all, could you tell me, how many years have you been entertaining people?
Well, at least 35 years. When I talk of entertaining, I include several years in Oxford when I was in pantomimes, 6 in all, 1 each year. But since then, I've been entertaining clubs, and anyone who asks me is to entertain.
Could you tell me what part you most enjoyed acting?
Oh,
and
definitely,
why?
yes. Richard III, Shakespeare. I'm absolutely thrilled and enchanted with Richard III. I played Richard on a stage to 200 people, and I also had to understudy. I had 1,080 lines to learn. 1,080 lines, not words, lines.
What has been the most difficult part you have ever acted?
When Richard.
Have you ever had any embarrassing moments on stage?
None at all, no. I've enjoyed every minute that I've been on the stage, and it's been a real joy to me. I've loved it always.
What changes have you seen in Hanborough over the years?
Oh, definitely. The change from horses and carts many years ago to motor cars. I had one that cost me £5, and it ran for years and years and years, an old Morris 8, and it was a lovely old car, and I got about well in it. Then, of course, cars came on afterwards, generally.
If you could meet any one person in the world, who would it be and why?
Oh yes, when I was young, my family had a very special friend. He was young, and we were devoted to him, and he was devoted to us. And unfortunately, when he grew up, he felt it wise and necessary to go away, and he is now somewhere in America. I think, I don't know for sure, but I would dearly love to see him. It would thrill me beyond words.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greenway.
Thank you.